So actually, with this second part, I really wanted to, talk a lot more about Swords and Sandals and then your current Swords and Sandals project a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
What does I guess what does a life cycle for a Swords and Sandals game look like on like when you're developing it? Because everyone has their own, a professional game company is certainly different than maybe what an indie company how they would tackle it.
Very much so. And I find that each game has kind of gotten a little bigger in terms of the scope and everything. But in general, most of the Swords and Sandals games have been done in roughly a calendar year. So it's almost like I kind of work to whatever I can do between January and December, because it's almost like a psychological thing to start a new year, fresh new game. And if I can kind of just it's really arbitrary, but I find that that's a good deadline. I find most of the games that I've done have been done in one calendar year, except for this one, which is coming up on 2. Because I always felt like this one was always going to be a bit, it was a bigger game, so it was never going to be done realistically in a year. But you usually have one game on the go and then one game kind of like planned. And I'm sure, you're starting to make games yourself. As soon as you start working one game, you've got a couple of ideas for something else.
Yeah, for sure. Was that with Immortals? Was it more? Did you experience any like more burnout than usual because of the 2-year development?
I did recently. So this is the first kind of game that I've been able to work on full time, just for myself and everything. The other ones had been sort of part time, started off at night. This is kind of after when I used to work for the old company making the games for them, which was full time. But all the recent, like the remake Swords and Sandals ones and all the spin-offs and everything you see on Steam basically was all done sort of part time and at night and so on. But this one being the first one I could just focus on every single day, I found I was able to get so much done. But then the burnout only happened, weirdly enough, after I'd already released it in early access, because for some developers, and me included, I'm sort of driven by like the potential of something. So as long as you think maybe this will be huge, and then when the game comes out and you kind of know where it's at, you kind of eager to wrap it up and just get on with the next thing. So I felt like about a month ago I kind of developed a little bit of burnout with it. Like you get a couple of bad reviews, or you get the hype has died down a bit and you think, okay, well, I'm ready for the next thing now. So but then you can just get past that, and I'm sort of now in the home stretch. So but burnout's a real thing, and I've never met a dev that hasn't had a little bit of burnout.
I don't know if you probably maybe experienced this, maybe you still do, but I figured it might be something that you may have experienced in your earlier years of developing. I first experienced my burnout when I very first got into like playing with Unity and Unreal and making something, and I kid you not, I was just so excited about making games that I would be in front of my computer almost the entire day for like weeks, and it just eventually burned me completely out, and that's not good, because then I dropped game development for a little bit because I sat there and hammered at it, and then
Exhausted.
And what it was I just, while I was spending all that time, I kept hitting too many walls because I don't know a thing about C++ or Unreal, and so I kept hitting too many walls trying to use their engine. So is that something, like, do you get that eagerness when you start a new project probably, or?
You're exactly right. And that's, burnout comes in many forms, creatively, inspirationally, physically, exhaustion like this. And I feel like the burnouts that I often get are similar to the one you experienced, in terms of when you start making games, it's really fun, right? And it becomes, I'd feel like it's like playing a game. You're almost solving a puzzle and everything. And, if you play any one game for long enough, you kind of all of a sudden something switches and you're like, I've put in 400 hours of this game and I'm just completely exhausted on it. And then you kind of you never want to do it again. And I know with things like Unreal, actually pretty much any game engine, when you're learning it, you do hit so many roadblocks and you think, well, okay, well, I can't do that. And at some point you sort of you start to have that imposter syndrome and like, oh, maybe I'm just not good at this. And then you kind of think, that was I too ambitious in the project and this isn't turning out how I wanted? So yeah, you can definitely burn out that and just want to push it away and go, I'm just going to completely clear the project. I've never done C++ though, so I'm going to imagine that's a whole new level of challenge.
Yeah, I did. I tried doing C++ for a little bit, and it was interesting to say the least. But I ended up going back to C#, and I love C#. There's nothing. It's so
great language.
I'm just enjoying it. But so this recent game, it's taking you like 2 years. What do you do all the little stages that you typically have, and you know how bigger companies do your concepts and this, or and your, you know what I'm saying, like the music, the concept, this, or are you more of a kind of I'm just gonna build as I go type of, because that's what I've been doing lately.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, you know, there are so many best practice things when it comes to programming and game development and game design and everything that you can read about, and you sort of can intend to put into your game and start with the best intentions of like, all right, I'm going to do a big design document now and document all the features and so on. But I've done that for just about every game, and then I found within about a month I never even go
it's
back
out the
and
window.
consult the design document. It's out the window. The game has changed so much. I just tend to find it's good to do a design document for your own head, just to get some ideas and so on, and you know, put them down. But I literally sit down, open up a new program, and start coding. Like, okay, it's almost like a logical, and this is not at all best practice, but I literally go, okay, title screen. All right, then I'll go, you know, settings menu, and this is all before the game. It's like, well, the game's going to need this. It's going to need this, and then I might get bored one day. And it's like, oh, what kind of music should the game have? So I go scope a few bits of music.
Yeah, I'm the same.
Wouldn't it be cool to do some sound effects? Yeah, whatever kind of interests you. And then one thing I do find is that on the days when I have lots of energy, that's when I tackle the hard stuff, as far as like, oh, okay, you know, save game systems, or you know, some weird bugs or physics. The days that you don't have a lot of energy, they're the ones you can kind of sit back and collect sound effects or do a bit of art or whatever. But my process for developing games is very organic in terms of, it's almost like you're developing the game how it would be played. So, you know, you're going to need a tile screen, then you need to create character screen, then you need this. Once I've got that, whereas the correct way to do it is to prototype your game with the tiniest little screen, have the character running around, then build everything else around it. But I feel like that's the fun stuff. So I want to get to that when I'm sort of tired of the other stuff, rather than doing that and then having to go back and do the boring stuff.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting way, because then you're doing your boring stuff, and then but you have that kind of, hey, the fun stuff comes next. Let's hurry up and get to that.
Yeah, it can be motivating, and you feel like no matter what, even if the prototype for the game changes as far as like, you know, the game mechanics and everything, you're still going to need the title screen and the settings and the options and all that sort of stuff. It's still going to need to be there if you tweak it later. So, but my own process is really all over the place. I kind of, from one day to the next, and probably a lot of indie developers are like that. You kind of work on what interests you, and you can do that as long as you're disciplined, as long as you feel like, well, I am going to go back and tackle the hard stuff or the other stuff. Some developers only want to work on the fun things, and then when it comes time to doing all the other stuff, they kind of burn out in the project and go, well, I'm going to start a new prototype of something else, you know, and then they don't see the game through to completion, and that can be that can lead to burnout of a different kind, where you go, well, I never finished projects, so what's the point?
Well, I mean, to be fair, you know, as an indie developer, you do wear all your different hats. So you got to be the sound department. You got to be so I think it's completely fine to maybe deviate every once in a while and explore things. It helps make it not as monotonous, I guess you could say. It helps break the so it's not boring. Yeah, exactly.
And I think also when you're first starting out and you're learning game dev and all the different techniques and so on, it's really good to experiment and try out all the different systems and work out what kind of games you want to build. And once you have kind of done a bunch of these, certainly smaller games, then you can start going, right, well, now I'm going to lock in and do all this, because my approach doesn't work if you haven't, if you don't have a history of sort of, you know, finishing games. If you do that sort of like, all right, this is the game I want to build, and I'm going to build, you know, 1,000 different kinds of weapons and all that sort of stuff, and then you burn out before you finish the game and you've done all this sort of back stuff, you know.
But Yeah, my current approach is so last time I spoke to you, I was finishing up like the kind of a platformer, and then like I wasn't gonna make a good platformer. It wasn't gonna stand out. All this other stuff that we talked about. So I basically created the first level from beginning to finish, and then I was like, okay, there. I built that. I learned, and then I moved on to a project that I've been seriously working on now, and I just want to make a simple arcade type game. And what I've been focusing on is just the core game loop. I haven't touched like the title screen or anything like that. I'm just focusing on
This is the best practice.
right
way.
in
This
the
is
middle.
the wise way to do it. This is the way you should be doing it.
But I do find myself doing the things where like I'm adding sound and all this other stuff when there's really no purpose to me doing that right now. I added the only reason I do it is because it makes it feel more complete. I guess it's weird that sound makes it feel progress really, because I add like a little theme to like battle music. I add sound effects when you swing your sword or hurt an enemy, and that makes it feel so much more wrapped up. I guess I don't know how to explain it.
Huge. It's certainly, and like you find often even in a lot of modern movies and so on, there's so many quick action cuts and so on. The sound makes up for so much. And
yeah, definitely.
One little game dev tip that I can tell you that just from my own experience is put the sound effects in that you like, play around with a few days and the music, but then as soon as you're ready to do it, just mute that again, because otherwise it's probably really good sound and music, but you'll be sick of it. And then you'll kind of be the end, and you'll be second guessing, going, "Oh, I'm sick of this music. It's not really good," but it's actually just you're burnt out on it. So put it all in there, but then at some point, just mute it, because otherwise you'll kind of drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, I know 100% what you're saying, because I put in my sounds, I loved them, but then I muted all sounds on the editor because I didn't want to hear it anymore, because I knew that if I was going to add something new, hit that test button, play it, hear all the sounds, and do that hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, you're eventually gonna be like, man, I'm really sick of this.
But I do the same. Getting sound effects in there as soon as I can is kind of, I find it's a very motivating thing, because it goes, there is something here. This game, it feels cool, it sounds cool, and everything like that. And whatever you need to motivate yourself to keep working on it, I think.
Yeah, music and sound is definitely like really powerful. It gives the entire feeling and tone, along with your art. But because the code is kind of just like, this skeleton. You can't feel. There's no emotion or expression with the code really. The art and the sound, which is unfortunate, because the people that code it, I like you said in one of your videos, nobody ever goes, "Wow, that developer coded that really well right there." It's usually
other game developers.
Yeah, it's usually, "Oh, this music is great," or "That graphics are awesome." That's what it is.
No one's like, "What a cool functioning UI you have there. I love how they drag and drop this bit."
But so you just gave that tip, and that's what one of my questions was: do you have a single kind of philosophy or tip or something that just stuck with you, whether it be from a book or someone else you spoke to or something you came up with?
On making games?
Yeah, just like maybe anything, whether anything within game dev.
I mean, there's one thing that and it's probably less, I don't know, for me, my philosophy has always been make the games you liked to play as a kid, but do them with a modern spin. So I kind of I like to take elements from things from my own childhood, and then kind of bring them into a modern sense and go, what are the things that I don't like from that game from long ago? And then just try and cut them out. So I take inspiration from nostalgia is a huge part of the game development that I make. Is why I don't do a lot of 3D stuff and everything, because I wasn't really that big when I was young. So I think if I had to give, that's probably my biggest game dev tip, just based on my own sort of style of thing. But don't make games just because you're chasing something that's popular, because you're not going to and you've probably heard that before, but you're not going to put your heart into it if you're just going, well, I know that right now, so Vampire Survivor is a really popular game, or in the past it was Match 3 games or Zelda clones or whatever it is. don't do your own one just because you see it's popular. But if you do have one, if you always wanted to make one, even if it's a popular genre, and you're passionate about it, then you might still be able to make a difference, because game dev without passion is just sort of like, it just becomes a job like everything else, and there's better paying jobs out there.
Yeah, don't chase the trend. You're probably gonna miss it regardless. So
yeah, by the time you realize there's a trend, right? And that's so my next game, which I haven't revealed yet, I've kind of talked a little bit in my last video, but I mean, I've got an idea in my head, but that was originally starting out was like, I played Vampire Survivors and was like, oh man, this game loop is so addictive and cool. And then I started sort of thinking my own spin on Vampire Survivors. I spent a few days, and obviously I'm still working my other game, but by the time I kind of go, right, that would be cool, I realized, look, you know what? Everyone's doing this. And then I had looked some video, there's a video channel called, like, I think it's Best Indie Games or Clemmy Games or something like that. He had this, all right, here's a bunch of Vampire Survivors clones that have just come out. There was about 60 of them that have just already come out in the last couple of months. And I figured, well, if it's going to take me another 6 or 7 months to a year to make my own, how many will be out there by then? And not to say that you couldn't make one that's good, but like chasing a trend is just a recipe for, failure.
real quick, I wanted to mention, I saw, I retweeted it that Swords and Sandals Immortals is going to be part of that turn-based fest.
Yeah.
And
yeah, for sure.
What is that kind of just them like looking at all these games and seeing what's the best currently, or how is it? This is my first idea of it.
So yeah, a bunch of game developers that I follow and a couple of game reviewers that are sort of specialized in turn-based games. And it's almost like a community of sort of supportive game devs that has like a turn-based Thursday hashtag where, every Thursday people post screenshots from their games. And one of them, I can't remember who it was, actually a couple of them have set up this turn-based sale on Steam where they'll just kind of feature a couple of games that are either in early access or just released, and they've applied to Steam to get, a bit of promotion, and we all put custom discounts. So I don't think it's a huge thing. It's not like what's that Next Fest, the early access festivals that but I think anytime you have a bit of a festival and a sale, it's really good for exposure. So but it is good. I think it's really good to try and get your game into as many different festivals or sales or showcases you can, because promotion and marketing is a huge part of game dev. You got to build up those wish lists. If we're talking Steam, which is the main PC kind of game dev market, getting wish lists and everything is hugely important.
Is Immortals still on sale?
Yeah, it's just yesterday finished, but but it's going on sale again on the 8th of December till the 12th for the turn-based festival, and then there's the Steam winter sale like a week or two after that. So and I'm finding these days, like and probably most game devs find this, your sales kick along like this, and then they go up for the sales, and then they go right down for a little while. It's really become a sale driven economy. For a lot of gamers will just kind of not buy things unless they're deeply discounted.
So everyone pick up Immortals, and then are you on Steam, and then are you still planning on a Nintendo Switch release?
Well, here's the weird thing with it. It's made in Godot. So Godot, you can't port it to Switch yourself out of the box because it's this open source framework, and Nintendo have a closed source system. Same with Sony and everything. But you can actually contact third-party publishers and who specialize in that. And for some reason, they can do it. So I'm kind of like in two minds of whether to do it or not. I actually had a game ported to Switch from Unity called Spartacus. You remember I gave you the key for simple platformer, and I did that about a year and a half ago, but it was with some publisher in Eastern Europe, and to be honest, they did a fair job on the port, but they either didn't market it or they've just been really not forthcoming in the communication with me, because it has not sold well at all. And I'm kind of like, well, early on, Switch games made a lot of money, but now I think the market for that is quite saturated as well. So I'm kind of like, I'm now in two minds whether to bother porting it.
Well, that would be a really cool experience, I would think. regardless of like, obviously if it, it might not be financially feasible or just not make sense in general, but it would be so cool to say I have a game on Nintendo, or maybe one day down the road you got Swords and Sandals 8 and you have a physical copy of a game, and that'd be so incredible. But I'm worried that physical games are that market, and it's a shame because I love collecting
the boxes,
the games, and there's no manuals in games, and they don't, and that's so bad.
Oh man, so you missed out. You're pretty young, but when I don't know how recent this sort of stopped, but when I was growing up in the 90s and probably the late 80s to the 90s, certainly with things like role-playing games and so on, the Ultima series in particular, you get a box, you get a cloth map, like an actual tea towel kind of map. You would get a little symbol from the game, like a little totem or something like that. You get a full parchment manual, and then the discs with like really nice artwork on them and everything. And then I guess that was expensive to do and put the price of the games up. But these days you just don't get any of that. And game manuals are so much fun to look through and everything. So I miss that as well. You do see on Kickstarter and things people going, we're going to bring that back. And if you buy the physical copy of the game, you will get all this kind of stuff. Like
last time I got something that extravagant, sorry to cut you off, was like from Elder Scrolls Special Edition. Comes with a book, a coin, all this other stuff.
Yeah, so that's good. They have started, I think, with things like Kickstarter and special editions, they have started bringing that back, which is kind of cool. But it was definitely a lost art. I would love to have that for Sword and Sandals, but I think realistically, like the game series it's just in this weird spot where it's popular enough for me to make a living out of it, but just not quite big enough to sort of be in the public consciousness enough to have boxes and to have a Kickstarter that big and everything like that. As much as I'd love to, and it's weird, it kind of gets by on a lot of nostalgia from the Flash era when everyone was playing it. These days, everyone, but everyone was playing Flash games, and as a Flash game, a lot of people were playing that. These days, it has a nice dedicated audience, but they're not big games by any means in terms of like worldwide popularity, and to have a Switch port and everything, I just feel like they just need to make more money, unfortunately. But having said that, like you touched upon this, when I first got that Switch port of Spartacus and I played on the handheld Switch, saw that little Nintendo logo come up, I was like, this is amazing. It was really, and to have that, even if it's sort of like it's way easier to get on Nintendo than it used to be, it's still one of those lifelong dreams. I think is kind of cool.
For sure.
Anytime you can do it, it's still a cool novelty. Like the first time you get a game on your phone, that kind of stuff like that, or the first time you put it up, it's a real kind of like, hey, I did that, And I think you'll experience that if you just, keep building your games. And you know what? It doesn't matter if they're successful or not. Eventually, it matters. But if you want to make a career of it, but if you have just gotten through the whole process and press the button, submit, and the game's been approved, that's more than a lot of game devs get to do. So it's I think it's worth persisting with.
Yeah, I think I've gotten a couple things on the iPhone just because I went to college a little bit to do like applications on the iPhone.
Oh, nice. Congratulations.
But I am definitely looking forward to the day that I have a game on Steam, even if it only even if I only put it on, even if I put it on there for free, I don't care. Like I'm looking for the day that I get it, because right now I am doing this as a hobby, and if I can get it onto Steam, there's something on my portfolio that not very many people have.
Sure,
I'm excited for that day. The game that became Swords and Sandals 1 was originally called Duel of Heroes, correct?
Yeah, it was originally. Yeah, it was Duel of Heroes, the old in BASIC, and then I kind of did a Flash version called Who Wants to Be a Gladiator, and they were never finished. Neither of those games were finished, but they became Swords and Sandals. And
I read a little bit on the Trial of Champions. Was that like a pretty big influence for Swords and Sandals?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, there's 3 books in this trilogy by the Fighting Fantasy guys. Death Trap Dungeon, Trial of Champions, and the third one, which was called like Armies of Death or something like that, which was a big influence on Crusader. Like basically those 3 books, like it's basically a guy in an arena and there's a dungeon underneath. You got to go through this dungeon, and then the second one is mainly focused on fighting in arena. And I remember like, oh, this would be so cool as a computer game. So when I was learning to program in BASIC, which is super simple, it's a basic language, that was my sort of inspiration just for like working out systems and combat and stuff like that. Because like, you knew that when you're making a simple game, you really didn't have the skill to make this big map and everything like that. So if you put it in an arena, you don't have to worry about that. All you have to worry about is different kinds of enemies. The background is static and everything. There's not even a background, it's all just text. So
talking about kind of your older stuff, Antares, he was from, you had a comic in your childhood, right? That he came from?
Yeah, kind of. Weirdly enough, he did, but he didn't look like that. It's sort of the influences are like it looked a little bit like the Star Wars Royal Guards is kind of an influence, the Emperor's Guards. Also like the Warhammer, there's these sort of Chaos Warrior figures. I don't know if you're familiar with Warhammer, but they had this kind of tall helmet kind of thing. And I had this character in my old comics, which was, I think it was called like King Chaos or something. As a kid, everything you do is sort of derivative and you borrow from everything. It's all derived from something else. And by the time when Swords Sandals, the first game came out, I hadn't even thought about using this character. But when I needed the second game, I felt I needed a bad guy who kind of looked a little scarier than the guy from the first one. So I kind of drew upon that, and then and I was kind of lucky in terms of it is a pretty generic derivative looking character, but for some reason it sort of it captured the fans a little bit, and I think people kind of really like something about, and same with Darth Vader. It's like anytime you have a bad guy who has like a really like either a mask and with eyes or something, you can kind of project your own fears onto them. When you can't see their face, it's a really kind of like something scary about it. As soon as you can kind of reveal their face and their emotions, you lose a lot of that fear.
Well, there is an innate human fear with not being able to see another human's face, because you can't read what emotion they're portraying. Are they going to attack me? Are they sad? Like who's behind the mask? And I mentioned in the first part that I did want to ask you about this Emperor Antares, and I don't know if this was entirely deliberate, but his backstory really reminds me of like the Darth Vader fall type of thing.
Yeah, and I think it wasn't intended, but it was like, I was thinking about that more recently, it's heaps like that. And I think I probably sort of subconsciously borrowed a lot from that. And when you read the kind of like, there's a backstory to it that isn't really in the games, but if you read the kind of like the website, I kind of did a backstory where, he tried to save his parents from dying. This is basically the same sort of thing where then he's trying to stay alive and seek, eternal life. Darth Vader wants to have, Padme, keep her alive and then cheat death and everything like that. So I think without even realizing it, I basically, borrowed a lot from that sort of pastiche. And so I think if I ever kind of bring him back more and more, because a good villain always seems to keep coming back, I need to start maybe differentiating a little bit more from that the Darth Vader archetype.
There's something so powerful about a villain you can relate to and has almost like a tragedy. Like they didn't choose to be evil from the get start. Like they became evil in pursuit for like a good reason, typically. Like
and they just didn't have a good mentor.
Yeah, exactly. Like, Anakin just wanted to stop people he cared about from dying,
losing,
and he was just like, one day I'll be so powerful I can stop people from dying, and he was so set on that because he just his whole life he was a slave, and his mom died. He saw his his wife who was going to die, and so he was just a cornered animal trying to find a way out, basically. And
in a really rigid system like the Jedi, where they just said, you know what, it has to be this way. You're not following the rules, And then he falls under the influence of, a Sith Lord who can kind of seduce him a little bit and, say, here's what the dark side is and everything. And it's a great story. And it's probably like, I'm sure, George Lucas has borrowed many motifs from different sort of, classic stories and everything. But it's a timeless one. And I think, you're right. People can identify a villain with someone like that, as opposed to someone like Sauron from Lord of the Rings. No one identifies as Sauron because
Just I'm evil.
flaming eyeball. No one's evil because it's evil.
Yeah, exactly. There's no like, because even with like, the meme like Thanos was right. People can understand where he's coming from, because if you're coming from a cold logical perspective, there's nothing entirely wrong with what he was trying to do. Morally, it's wrong, but
but exactly. And people, I think anytime you have a villain that is a little bit more tragic backstory or something you can identify with, they're much more fun. And I think it's always the most fun character to create. Whenever I make a Swords Sandals game, I've realized that the villain is usually the character that is people resonate with the most. And so with the new one, I kind of wanted to have it create another memorable villain and so on. Still, I've never been able to make one as memorable as the first one, but it does get me thinking, like, whenever you make a game, keep the villain in mind and put them on, the promotional art and everything, because people kind of go, oh, that looks cool. Who's that bad guy?
Is that something?
It's way more fun than the hero.
Is that something you considered when making the Starbound Gladiator? Was putting him in this whole? I mean, just so you don't know his identity. Who is this guy?
Well, the reason for that was because I always wanted it to be I flipped it around in terms of when you win Swords and Sandals 3, you are the hero and you kind of defeat the big evil automaton robot. They're not evil, but like you go off into space. So it's a really kind of like almost like a shark jump moment. Like, all right, now you guys can go fight in space. But I never got to come back to that for like commercial reasons and so on. The series went off the rails. But when I thought, well, I want to make a new Swords and Sandals that might potentially be the last one in the series if it doesn't do very well, whatever. But I thought, let's bring that guy back, make him corrupted and evil. But because that guy could have been anyone in terms of you made the character in Swords and Sandals 3, I thought, well, put a mask on him so you project who you want him to be. And when you fight him in this game and you rip the mask off, it's been turned into some kind of like Lovecraftian eyeball with a horrible face and everything, but it could have been anything. So I thought, put him in a mask and let people project what they want it to be. With this one, though, I kind of felt like I wanted it to kind of look heroic, though. So you don't really know. He looks kind of like it should be a hero, because it was wearing the hero's armor, was a hero, and then it went bad. I didn't want him to have the traditional kind of like horns and evil black armor and everything.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was going to be my next question. Was there a thought process in how he looked? Because he looks like a good guy. He really looks like he's coming to save the day and everything, and he's actually coming to destroy everything. Yeah,
because he left as a hero. It was the good guy, and something like that. I think that's not completely original. I remember, I think Diablo 1, you win the game, and then I think you turn into Diablo 2 or something like that. There is some kind of like the hero from Diablo 1 returns as the bad guy in Diablo 2 or something like that. So I thought, and even in Baldur's Gate, something like that happens where the bad guy becomes the good guy. Switching the bad guy to the good guy or the good guy to the bad guy it's a well-trodden route, but it's also a really fun one. It's something I love to see in movies and books and things. So it's fun to be able to do.
Well, I think it's good just because you kind of get to experience that character again in a way. Like after you beat a game, there's this feeling of like it's over with, it's done. There's no continuation. My main character's off. Like he doesn't go anywhere. I think it's great because it brings him back, and it allows that player, if they played the first one, to go, oh hey, that is my character, and I get to experience him again in a more badass way.
I mean, imagine something like, say, like Dark Souls series or something like that. They have like, you get more and more powerful, more and more powerful. What if you played Dark Souls and your character gets to the end, is this hugely beastly character, then you could somehow save it up to the cloud. Then when you played the next Dark Souls, the bad guy was that character from the first one. That would be so cool, because all the care and everything you put into that character, you now have to, it's flipped around and you have to beat them. It'd be so cool.
Well, and I feel that's definitely something that's possible, just because I'm sure have you played games like Mass Effect or Dragon Age, where all your choices kind of go to the next game?
They give to the next one. Yeah, definitely. That sort of narrative structure. It's really cool when they have things like that. So it's where I like to see games go. I think realistically, I've always talked about making a big role-playing game like that, but they're so complicated and deep. You really need a big team to do it. But those kind of games are so good where your choices actually matter.
This question I've been really wanting to ask you is the lightheartedness of Swords and Sandals a product of your art style, or did you always plan it to be comical?
No, I think it was just the art style.
See, I wondered that.
Yeah, I think I've never been able to draw anything that looks remotely kind of scary, or particularly realistic. And so I figured, well, that's just the way I draw. And as a teenager and a kid, I'd always drew comics. And I think I've just always had I think if they don't look serious, you can do all these serious things with them, but it still will feel kind of like, oh, it's kind of fun. So it all stems from them. And I think where the series kind of went off the rails a little bit, Swords and Sandals, not even off the rails, but it's had all these different art styles for different artists. And I think I've always felt like, if I'd had the time and the budget and everything, it'd be cool if I could kind of draw all the art, because having the art like that sets the tone for the whole game, doesn't it? So if you have this silly looking characters, then you kind of, the game will feel silly. But if the characters look serious, but they're doing silly things, you kind of go, that's not how this game should be,
So there's a parallel universe out there where, Oliver made a completely serious, like hyper-realistic Swords and Sandals.
Yeah. Those kind of games, you do see them out there, and there's some gladiator sort of style games out there. And then when the gladiators do something kind of a little bit silly or something, it really almost feels out of character. And like, what's that all about? Why are they doing that? The characters are, they're fighting for their lives, and this person's just lost their leg. Why would they be waving their hands around like this and yelling and stuff? So, yeah. But I think one thing I kind of, hindsight's a really powerful thing, but if I think I could do it all again, I'd probably really lean into the Sword and Sandals 1 and 2 silliness a lot more, and make the games more humorous and fun, because the art style kind of directed that. And as the games kind of progressed and the art budget got bigger, or the artists were different, I kind of lost a lot of that. And in this new game, I tried to put a little bit of it in there, but it isn't anywhere near as sort of zany as the first one.
Well, because Immortals looks really good. It doesn't have as much of that, original art style that you did back in the day. It does. I don't know. At some point, like, I don't know if Swords and Sandals, the next one is going to be even, is that just a natural progression, or do you plan to go back? Or
it's a good question. I think if I was going to go back to the series and I need to make some money here, like, you have to lean into nostalgia as well again. And I think I'll probably go, right, how about I just draw these things again with my own style, and just because that's the ones that people remember. People don't. I really like the artist I've been working with for this game is an awesome artist called Alexander Tarantev, and he's really good and adaptable and so on. But I kind of I gave him a brief on what it should look like, but he kind of his art style suits the game, but it suits any kind of game. So it's harder for that to stand out as this is a Swords and Sandals game, and that could be art from any game in some ways. So. I think yeah, you're right. If I was to do another one, I'd keep this. You know what I'd do? I'd bring the scope way back. I'd use my own art style, and then I'd kind of make the game loop much faster and much more like, I'd scale it back a lot. Because something like a Vampire Survivors or something where it's like, fight, upgrade, that kind of thing. Whereas these new ones. When they're new, this last bunch over the years, they've become so much more role-playing, and then so many deep talent trees and all these different story things and everything. It does become quite a different thing to what you originally set out to do.
Swords and Sandals. One thing I really noticed throughout all the games, and I'm sure everyone noticed, is the prevalence of quotes. Do you have one specifically you like, or?
Yeah, I like them all, but there's two that I really like, and one of them is the I think it might be the very first quote from the first game, like the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, which is kind of cool. And the other one I really like is fall 7 times, stand up 8. Which
Yeah,
is
that's a good one.
Kind of simple one. I can't remember what I saw that kind of thing in, but you see them at the beginning of movies and books and so on. And I think these inspirational quotes are just kind of like a fun way to, you know, they obviously inspire, but it adds a weird sort of grandiosity to a game that probably isn't very grand at all. But all of a sudden, one thing that on those quotes is some people, you know, and you can can't blame them for this, but younger kids and so on sometimes think that I came up with those, because in the first ones I didn't attribute them to anyone. I kind of just said, oh, like Mr. Muji or some kind of, who was the wise old, you know, stereo character. So in more recent ones, I tried, at least I think in Pirates and Crusader, I now at least give attribution to the philosopher or the general or whoever said those quotes.
Are you? Would you consider yourself like a history buff then? Do you love history specifically?
I love history, but I'm not. I'm definitely not a buff. I love reading about it and listening about it and watching things about it. My memory is terrible, so you kind of you'll know bits and pieces from everything, but then when you get sort of like when you want to try to explain the details of it, it's out the window, because
yeah.
I don't know if you like, but a lot of people are like that. But definitely history has been a huge part of stuff that I like to read and inspired by and so on. How about yourself?
Yeah, I love there's something fun about going through like high school. For me, having a good teacher explain history is a huge deal, and I think that made me really fall in love with it, because it's so cool to learn about just everything they did in history, their culture, you know, how they traded, you know, what wars they were in, why did they go to war, you know, what was considered valuable in their area. And I'll watch documentaries with my girlfriend. I don't know if you ever just sit down with your wife and watch like a random docu-series or something, but it's something I enjoy.
Yeah, and history, like, you know, they're so alien in so many ways and yet so familiar in other ways, in terms of like, you might read a letter from the 1700s from a soldier going off to war, a letter to his wife or his kids, and go, hey, that person's not so different than us. And it really brings home that fact that, like, you know, we are all just people. I've just finished a really good book called Sapiens, which is by a guy called Yuval Noah Harari. It's an Israeli philosopher, and he just kind of goes through the history of humanity, but why we have money and the concept of money, or the concept of trade or religion or that kind of thing. And it has historical anecdotes and so on. It just really got me. And every time I read these books, I go, oh, wouldn't that be a great thing? I got to remember this to talk to someone about. You finish the book and then you forget. Like, have you ever listened to Hardcore History by a guy called Dan Carlin?
I have not.
It's probably the most popular historical podcast. I'm not going to say for sure, but he's fantastic, world famous podcaster who takes 4 to 5 months to record these episodes, and each one might go for, like, I think he did one on the fall of Rome, and it's about 8 hours long or 9 hours long. He did one on the Mongols and everything, but he's an American, has this really, he goes, he says, I'm not a historian, I'm just a fan of history. And he tells you this historical events, but in a way that, like, really capture your imagination. But yeah, go back and listen to a couple of them, and if you're interested in kind of while you're working, just some kind of cool historical kind of podcast. It's like, I've been listening to it for about 10 years now, and good thing is he takes so long to do them, you can catch up quite quickly. But yeah, that has been really re-inspired my love of history, and that sort of just listening to those again and topics that you kind of had never thought about, like the ancient Mongols, or the Punic Wars, or even the Japanese in World War II, more modern history and that kind of thing. So yeah, I love it. history. If you're a fan of history, then there's a lot of good stuff out there, right?
Yeah, there definitely is. It's just we just got done watching one on like what was it called? It was called, I think, Ancient Apocalypse or something. It's trending on Netflix right now.
Netflix one. I have my friend John Stacefield recommended it to me.
It's really fascinating because he basically just goes around and shows you all these sites of, you know, ancient structures and kind of, you know, were there intelligent humans before, you know, what we currently have set. Like they found, I think, a monolithic structure that they think was maybe used for trade even back when people were still hunter-gatherers and stuff like that. It's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and you kind of think, you know, how much have we lost that was, you know, not documented?
Oh yeah, like you know, when all the libraries burn in history, we just go back so many years in technology. It's such a shame when you see that stuff. Do you have a specific era that you love in history?
My favorite is probably the Crusades. It's not that well documented, or it's just not popular. You don't read a lot about it and hear a lot about it, but I find it a really fascinating and bloody time in history, and I find the scope of it really epic in terms of just sort of, you know, the cradle of civilization in Jerusalem, everything, and all of a sudden you have this war between two massive religions, and you know, all in the name of God, but actually in the name of land grab and everything, and power grab. So I love that. I find that, and probably Roman era, I think, is, you know, most people's favorites as well. But how about yourself?
Oh, I'm just, you know, I'm medieval, dude. I love my Dark Ages and my medieval. I mean, I think I honestly can't tell you what made me go, I love knights. I love the, you know, chivalry, all of that. Though the knights are a small bit of it, but that's definitely what probably grabbed me initially. Like I these really romanticized, like, guys in full plate armor that a realistic, like, superhero in a way, kind of like that's what they kind of feel like they can do anything. And like I said, I can't tell you what really, like, triggered me to love that initially. Maybe it was playing a fantasy game, or, you know, my uncle being really into showing me Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. But I always loved castles and all that stuff. And I love the historically accurate games. Have you seen what is it called? Kingdom Come Deliverance. Love it.
Great. I've played only a few hours of it, but it's so cool in terms of, like, you actually have to teach your character to read, and, you know, and all the little sort of simulations of medieval life, and, you know, it feels like you're in this little poxy medieval village and that kind of thing. Yeah, great game.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Spartacus was in Unity. What was the change to Godot for? Like, did you just like that engine better?
Yeah, so I had just a few. I've always been a reluctant Unity developer. Even when I first heard about it in 2010 or 11, I was like, oh, that looks kind of cool. But then I remember trying it out, and I just could not get my head around the 3D space of it, and it ran slowly and so on. Unity became really popular, and then I figured, well, I have to learn this. But then my first few experiences of it, I couldn't get my head around the UI of it very well, but something didn't click. And then when I made Spartacus, I figured it out, and I thought, okay, well, I know enough Unity now to go, well, this is the engine I'm going to use. It's fine. But then I didn't develop Spartacus for a while. I actually went back to make one other game in Flash, in the Crusader Redux game. And because I'd already had used the engine for Pirates, so it was like a bit of a trying to, you know, make a bit more money out of the engine. But when I went back to Unity and I was in Spartacus, I was like, oh, this is just, I have no idea what I've done here. This feels messy, and things taking ages to load. And then I loaded up a new build of Unity, and it completely screwed over the old code, and I didn't upgrade it properly. And right about then, I saw something about Godot, and I was like, oh, that looks terrible. What's the point of making another engine? You can't compete with Unity or Unreal. What are you guys doing? And I kind of laughed at it. But then I kept seeing more and more about it. And then I saw a couple little 2D things made, and I thought, you know what, I need to make something small and in 2D, and I'm so sick of the Unity being so big and heavy and taking a couple of minutes to load up that
It does.
what is the harm in just trying this Godot engine, which is 30 megs in size? I was originally going to try Game Maker because I just thought, you know what, I don't want to fight with the engine anymore. I just want to make a game, and I know that retro games have been so popular, and a lot of good games have been made, a lot of popular games made in things like Game Maker and small game engines. And knowing that my own skill is much more in 2D rather than 3D, I thought, what's the harm in it? And so I bought a book on it, somewhere on the shelf there, like Godot, learn Godot in three days or something. So I got that, read it, and was like, this is actually really cool. And it reminds me, it's kind of halfway between Unity and Flash. And I just fell in love with it because it was just, it loads up in about 3 seconds. The whole engine's about 40 megs. And for me, it just clicked. So there are still many moments when I look at it and kind of go, Unity does this doesn't do that. I'd love to have this kind of cool thing that's in Unity. So for most developers, I still think Unity is like, the solution and an awesome engine. But for me, it was just something just didn't click with the way it worked versus the way I work. So I just found I was just much more comfortable in Godot. So
Well, makes sense.
if I wish I'd built Spartacus in Godot, because I wasn't fighting so much with the engine. There's all these things that went wrong with Spartacus that I feel like I wouldn't have had that problem in Godot. So I would have made a better game because I would have had more time to work in the game and less time on fighting the engine. So, but you don't figure these things out until you actually build them, right? You need to actually use the tool enough to know whether it's for you or not. So I'm kind of loath to ever recommend an engine to someone, categorically, other than this works for me. I always say, hey, try this engine out. If you're finding it has problems with it, stick with it for a while, get a bit comfortable with it. If that's a problem, it's still not working for you, try another engine, because there will be something that will work for you. And if it all fails, build your own engine. No, don't do that.
That would be so hard.
People do it, and then they kind of like, there's some game developer called Randy. He's on YouTube, and he's got hundreds of thousands of followers. He's an Aussie guy. And I've been watching him for a few years, and I've just kind of been throwing my head up in like despair because he keeps just building his own engines and getting nowhere. And he's trying to do a 2D game, and he goes, all right, to do this instead, I'm actually going to build a 3D character and then render it out to 2D pixels. And he goes, now I need to learn how to make 3D modeling. And it's like years and years in, he hasn't built a single thing.
Well, I think
I think it's part of the fun.
Oh yeah, I think Concerned Ape actually built Stardew Valley from the ground up, his own engine and everything as well.
Yeah, it's a remarkable story, that one.
It is for sure. It's like it's one of those. I mean, the guy already was talented to begin with. He could do music, he could code,
and art and everything. Yeah, exactly.
So he had everything in the right place to actually execute that. Something I really wanted to ask you: how did you end up working with? I think it's pronounced Brulov, that did the art from Blasphemous, because the art, the pixel art in that game is astonishing. It's amazing.
So I'm trying to think how I got in touch with him. I think it might have been on Twitter actually, and he had so he had done an asset pack, which was just a simple like medieval castle, and I was like, this is really cool. I want to use this as like the placeholder for my game. And then I kind of thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if I could get more art from that developer, from that artist, and then make the whole game in that style. So I got in touch with him, and he was keen to do it. The one thing with working with him was his art is really good, but he took a long time, and I found I didn't get as much art as I kind of had hoped. So I had to fill it in with a lot of other asset packs, and I actually did a lot of the pixel art myself in terms of getting things and editing them, and it kind of like is a little bit there is a variety of variation in quality throughout the game. So the early levels, which are done by him, look awesome, and then some of the later ones, which are done by me, don't look as good. So, but yeah, really cool artist. And Blasphemous was incredible, right? He was one of a few artists on that, but he definitely is a very talented artist. But then I decided not to work with him again just because I needed art done a little faster than pixel art takes a long time as well. So
well, I'm sure he's a busy guy with his talents as well.
Yeah, exactly, busy guy, and I think the end result looked really cool, but I kind of quickly ran out of budget as well. So I was like, oh, okay, that's all my budget. Sorry, I can't afford anymore. I've got to now draw the rest of the pixel art myself. And it was like, what am I doing? And that's part of a planning problem on my part. As long as I've been in the industry, and when I say in the industry, I've never been in the AAA games or anything, but as long as I've been doing this, I make new mistakes every single game. And that's just the nature of it. As long as you make new mistakes, right? They say, you always, you improve by making mistakes and learning from them.
Well, I think you have a really good opportunity. I know this is the definitive Swords and Sandals. It is the best so far, in my opinion.
Thanks, man.
It is. It hands down takes everything I loved about all the others and just amplifies it. I always used to think Swords and 3. I thought the third one was my favorite, but this one just it blows it out of the water.
Cool.
Well, I just wanted to let you know that, and I'm sure you know that, but it's a really good game. And I wanted to ask.
Hey, you know what? Do you want to, just for fun? Do you want to do a voice set? Because there's been a few voice sets in there. I don't know how. Totally up to you, but like I've still got I've got room for another voice set if you just want to have your voice in the game. I feel like it'd be a nice sort of just a thank you to you for doing these interviews, and you can be part of the game. But let me know anyway if you want to do it, and we can do it. We can organize that.
I mean, that'd be awesome. Right now I'm using Undead Ollie, so
okay, cool. Well, you can be like it doesn't even have to be human. It can be like Undead Dame if you want, or whatever it is, or you can do your own monster voice set. But really easy for me to add them if I need to. So yeah.
All right, that'll be cool. I'll have to ask you for some some examples so I know what sounds to me.
Yeah, there's a little guide. I wrote up for it. So
okay, one of the things I was really interested in, because I thought this would have been a fantastic idea. At what point I know you mentioned you wanted to do like an XCOM like system for Swords and Sandals Immortals? Did that fall apart early on, or how did that work?
It sort of didn't end up. It fell apart pretty quickly, and then I felt like that was not the game the audience were hoping for, and I think I realized that I'd done a couple of games that were a platform game and a pirates game, and then a remake of a less popular Swords and Sandals game. I needed to get back to people just want to have the relatively simple, hit of the original Swords and Sandals. So I kind of thought, well, I better take the best bits of 2 and 3 and then throw in a few other things, and the XCOM stuff fell out the window pretty quickly. But I would like to do there are some parts of XCOM that I really like, and I want to kind of put into the next game. Not so much the tactical combat, which is awesome in XCOM, and I do love that. But what I like the most about XCOM is the base and the ant farm kind of view of the base, and all the cool little upgrades and tech tree upgrades you get in the base in between missions. I'd love to put that into a future game.
How do you figure out a way to gauge what your audience actually wants? Because if you can't talk to everyone that buys your game, and it's like, if you wanted to add or remove or expand on Swords and Sandals, I'm not entirely sure what you would do to because you're walking on eggshells, adding and changing things to your game. And for me, one thing I think would fit in well with Swords and Sandals is maybe you already got a caravan following you in this game. What about an entire party? You, rather than controlling one gladiator,
that was
almost
that
JRPG style.
For the next steps, I think I would probably the party based, almost Darkest Dungeons is a really good.
Love that game.
You know that game, yeah,
love it to death.
And I think so good. And I kind of I remember thinking when it came out, I was like, I wish I'd come up with that. And I'd had these original ideas to make something like that, and it just they did it so well. But I think that will be a next good step for the series. I think no matter what, there's always going to be, and it's the same with any kind of any creation that has a hit a long time ago. People always just want to hear the hits. People always just compare everything to Swords and Sandals 2, and sometimes to Swords and Sandals 3. And no matter what I do, even if it's more, even if I think it's got if it's better in most ways, they'll still go, well, it's not as good as this, or that you just go back and play the original. So I feel like at some point there is diminishing returns, and I look now at like the sales of the games and everything. The classic ones are still the most popular. Immortals is the second most popular, which is really good in terms of it's outsold all the Redux ones. But
it's so interesting to me that, and maybe it's just because the second one wasn't the first game I played, the third one was the first one I played.
Yeah.
But I just, something about the third one felt so much more, like, I want to say like it felt more fleshed out. I mean, it felt like there was more to it than, and
well, there was,
and so I'm not, can't hate on the players, but
yeah,
but I really loved the more, I like the more complex stuff though. So
me too, and that was always the path that I wanted to go down, and that represented the start of that path. And this game was probably the end of that journey. It got so far away though from Swords and Sandals 2 and what people liked about the second one, because when I did the remake of Swords and Sandals 2, I had some problems with the engine and everything, so there are a few technical issues with it, but a lot of people just hated having skill trees. They're just like, this is not what we wanted from the game. You've ruined what made the game fun. I was like, okay, fine. I didn't realize that, and so I've still kind of figured, look, if I ever really wanted to make more money out of Swords and Sandals, I still want to do other things with it, but I'd have to go back and like I was saying before, go back to what made Swords and Sandals 2 fun and just cut out all the things that I kind of like about it, and just make it this super simple thing, and just go, you know what, there's none of this extra skill trees and like crazy complex progression and everything like that. It's literally just, buy armor, upgrade, fight, buy armor.
Well, it's interesting to me that the skill trees isn't something that you received a lot of good feedback on, because part of the reason I love like the gladiator I'm creating is because it's very personalized, and that is your character. You want the custom, whatever armor you want, whatever skills you want to go through. I like the ability for each character to be different. You can have a different playthrough every time. If you play the second one, you almost have to be forced into kind of...
Yeah, there's only one or two play styles. There's not much. And I thought that's what people wanted too, but I think also people are kind of like nostalgic for what they had in their youth. And I kind of get that with other games, in terms of there have been games that have gone, I just like the simplicity of how they did it there, and they've kind of put all this other stuff in. I get that. So yeah. I'm really not sure. I need a break from it. I think I need to kind of just take a year off and then come back and kind of go, right, what do you guys really want now?
Yeah, right.
I've done the complicated one. Do you want another complicated one? Do you want a simple one? Do you just want me to remake Swords and Sandals 2 again with fancy graphics?
Well, if this is the potential final game in the series, is this maybe an opportunity to start something new, or maybe rebrand the whole series, or?
Yeah. So the plan is, the next thing I want to make is this sort of sci-fi Starship Troopers-y kind of game, which I'll, let you know more about once I know more about it. I'm going away on holidays tomorrow, just to, just a little beach holiday with the family, which would be awesome. Sounds funny, a beach holiday in December, right? But here it's summer, so. But usually when I kind of go to the beach, I have all these great ideas for like game ideas and things. I never truly switch off, but being away from the computer does give you ideas. But I'm going to spend about a year doing that, and then I think work out, like, if that does really well, I'm kind of like, all of a sudden you can do what you want, because you're not constrained by financial concerns.
The last question I had for you was, what is the most difficult thing for you that you've experienced to code? Because for me, so far with my game, it's been AI navigation and having the AI, if there's something destructible in my way, destroy it. Because what the enemy's trying to do in my game is basically your players are trying to defend a crystal, and monsters come in and they're navigating towards the crystal, but if there is maybe an obstacle in the way, they should destroy it and then continue on to it. So that's something I've been struggling with. I have it so that the AI will turn and attack the player if they're nearby instead. But
that's hard. You kind of go, how often can I, sort of like give information to the AI about how world is updated.
Yeah,
if I do it
exactly.
too much, the game's going to slow down, and these nav paths kind of, are they doing ray tracing, that kind of stuff. There's so many different ways to do it, but I had the same issue with Spartacus, and I ended up just doing really simple enemies that basically said you only go this left, right, or I ended up sort of having to scale back that. For me, the simplest, the challenge I have the most in game programming is maths. Just anything mathematics, I'm just so bad at it. And
I just Google that stuff.
yeah. I mean, I think it's one of those things that like, if you're good at maths, it really like game dev is for you. And I think when they do like school courses and so on, they should package up like maths in schools as like, this is for game dev. And if you had like a rocket launcher moving at 4 kilometers an hour, and then it hits 4 whatever it is, what is
Yeah,
the damage
right.
radius? Oh yeah. But so for me, say in every game I make, the things I think that the most buggy are things like how different talents and skills stack, and the arrays and that kind of thing. It always seems to be, I get all this stuff wrong because my maths isn't particularly good, and so I kind of go, oh, you should have calculated that before you calculated that.
Yeah, right.
And even like with an array, I always just wish an array would start at 1, because I always like arrays start at 0, and I know that, and I've been doing it for 20 years, but I always sometimes, you go like, oh, array 1. It's like, that's not the first element in the array, it's array 0, you know what I mean? So you might have some simple error like that where you're trying to get the size of an array and then you're 1 value out, and simple maths problems, you would be amazed at how much they trip me up.
Thank you very much for talking to me again. We'll have to talk again some other time.
Man, we definitely will, either later this year or early next year. And if we don't speak before the end of the year, happy Christmas to you and your family. And this is really good. We'll keep doing these. Hopefully anyone that's watching can learn something from them. And if you have any comments that we can learn from, let us know. And hopefully your channel goes from strength to strength. You always have to start somewhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
Start small. You have a good microphone now, a good camera. The tech tips are fun. You have a good camera presence and a very natural presence on camera, even if you don't always feel that. It's definitely comes
well,
across.
I appreciate that. I mean, because I really do try to just talk to the camera like I'm just trying to help someone out and talk to a friend or something like that. And
that's the way to do it. That's the secret, right?
And I'm my TikTok is building a lot, but the problem is trying to. I have a feeling I'm not going to be able to really translate that very well. But my Facebook is bigger than my YouTube.
There's always something, right? There's always, but as long as you're growing in one way or another, then you build up the audience, and eventually the audience will kind of determine where you
and these are nice because I can always put the full videos on YouTube for people that are interested, and I can put interesting clips on like TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. Get more material
but if we don't talk again, Merry Christmas to you as well, and everyone, Swords and Sandals Immortals is a great Christmas gift to get your friends and family.
Yeah, your grandparents will love it. Young babies, everybody.
Your dog, your cat.
Your dog or cat can chew on the. No, there's no physical box, but yeah, and I'll be on sale a few times over the Christmas break. So if you're interested, check it out. But thank you so much, Dane, and we'll speak again soon, my friend.
Yeah, thanks so much, Oliver.